Hey, welcome back. This is Professor Donna Byrne, and this is Estates and Trusts. This is our second module online, and this one is about the probate process. After this module, you should be able to list or describe several different types of probate practice. You should be able to use the word probate correctly in several different ways. You should probably be able to start distinguishing between probate and non-probate property. You will be able to describe the role of the personal representative and list 4 functions of the probate process. So let's get started. This module is designed to accompany Andersen and Bloom 4th edition, pages 1 through 18. Now, I'm assuming you've read those. If you haven't, please stop the video and do the reading first. This chapter begins with several statements by practicing lawyers, and they have various jobs related to this course. So one of my first questions for you is, which of their statements resonates the most with you? Do they describe kinds of law practice that you would be interested in for yourself? If so, what is it about their jobs that is appealing? Or what doesn't appeal? Is there any one of their jobs you would enjoy the most? Do any of them make particular sense to you? Pick one that's your favorite and tell us why. Post your response on the discussion board. Okay, and then I want you to do another thing. I want you to comment on somebody else's response. Okay, that means you have to post 2 things, your response and a comment on somebody else's. And I'd like you to do this before our next in-person class. Okay, so let's move on. Probate. This is a term with which most people are familiar, but what does it actually mean? You know, I know that my grandfather really wanted to avoid probate, and you'll hear about Grandpa Bob as we go along. A lot of people want to avoid probate, but what is it? You'll notice if you pay attention in these materials that it gets used in a lot of different ways. Probate system, probate court, the concept of probate, being subject to probate, probate assets, probate administration, ancillary probate administration, or sometimes we just talk about estate administration. But the word probate we'll see in a lot of different contexts. We'll try to answer the question in this module, or at least maybe in the next half of it, what are probate assets and what is probate property? And for now, we'll start with the scenario about Alice and Jeremy Newman on pages 9 to 13. Now, I think right off on page 9, Alice dies. Maybe at the top of page 10, not sure. So Alice has died. What does Jeremy, as the surviving spouse, need to do? Now, if you're the legal eagle in your family, or your extended family, you're probably going to be the one that gets asked this question. Okay, well, we have kind of not a problem, but a challenge, and that is Alice's name. How is that a problem? Well, some of the assets are in Alice's name. She had a number of things in her own name alone, obviously clothing, tools, her car, a savings account, some sculptures, a cottage, and other personal stuff. All right, here's a little sidebar. What do we mean by personal property? Well, first question, what is property? What is property? Now, if you said land or thought it, you need a little bit of a refresher from first-year property. Property is anything that can be owned, or anything that we're willing to say is property. Real property is land and everything attached to it. Everything else that can be owned is personal property. Ring a bell, I hope? So personal property doesn't necessarily have any personal attributes, right? Personal property could be books, it could be workbooks, it could be computers, it could be intangible things like stocks and bonds. All right, we'll see the word personal in another context, though, and that's personal representative. Now, when somebody dies, he or she becomes a decedent. Go ahead and say it, decedent. There are a lot of things decedents really can't do very well. They can't transfer title to cars. They can't transfer title to real estate. They can't go to the bank and change the name on their accounts. They can't resolve issues with their creditors. You can probably think of other things that a decedent can't do. Fortunately, all of a person's property becomes an estate as soon as the person dies. So the decedent kind of is out of it, and now we have an estate, which is a legal entity all by itself. And that's good. We can appoint someone to speak on behalf of the estate. We would call that person the administrator. Or if the person's appointed by a will, they might be the executor. Either one of these we will call generally the personal representative. Here, I'll disappear for a sec here. Sometimes people who are in this business call the personal representative the PR. And that has absolutely nothing to do with sports. This guy, if you don't recognize him, is Scott Jurek. He's a vegan ultramarathoner, and he's from the Duluth area. And I've given you the link there to where I got this picture. Okay, I'll be back. There we go. Okay, so back to Alice and Jeremy. Our problem was Alice's name was on some of the assets, so we need a personal representative to transfer those assets to whoever's supposed to get them. So we have a will, or Alice left a will, that says Jeremy should be the executor. What if she hadn't? Who should be the personal representative if we don't have a will to specify it? Your casebook says that a court will appoint, but that only gets us so far. You remember those writings at the beginning of the chapter? One of those guys was a probate judge. How do you know, if you're the probate judge, who to appoint as executor or as estate administrator, personal representative? Any ideas? Is it obvious that it should be Jeremy because he's the spouse? Should the spouse necessarily be first in line? Well, this is one of the legal rights that usually goes along with being a spouse. Now, it's not quite that straightforward because under our Minnesota statute, the spouse is only first in line if we're leaving something to the spouse, or if the spouse is going to get something. But even if the spouse is not going to get something, they're still pretty high in the priority list. Of course, with a will, we can designate anybody. So I gave you the link there to the priority list. Okay, so it's going to be Jeremy. Jeremy is the personal representative. Next question. Is probate necessary? Okay, now what do we mean by probate here? Here it means to use the probate court to administer the estate. So the question is, what can the probate court do for us, and what can the probate process do for us that we couldn't do for ourselves? In other words, what are the functions of the probate process? You should be able to pull some functions out of the probate readings in the casebook, but it kind of boils down to banks are really picky. Huh? Yeah, banks. Banks don't like to be sued, so they're very careful about paying money out to anybody not named in some document that they already have. So if you're a bank, what would you need to be really confident that, first of all, your client has died, and second of all, that the person you're talking to has a right to the money that they're trying to get from you? Here comes the PR to the rescue, our personal representative. That's Dennis Moore there with Lupins. We need a personal representative, somebody who has authority from the court to speak for the decedent and the estate, and to be responsible for knowing who's going to get what. All right? If you can prove that the PR has authority, then a bank will be willing to hand over assets. We can transfer real estate title. Right? We can get everything to where it needs to go. We can put creditors on notice that this estate is going to be closed up pretty soon. And we can bring some closure and finality to the whole thing. Okay, so what are the benefits of probate again? It helps us quiet title to real property. It helps us resolve disputes about who gets what. Now, we don't have any disputes this time. Everything's just going to Jeremy, but sometimes there are disputes. It cuts off creditors' claims, gives them a time frame within which to come forward or otherwise not bother us anymore. And it can help collect the assets. If you think about it, sometimes it might be hard to find out exactly what assets the decedent held if you don't have the legal authority to find out about them. So banks don't make it a practice of giving your bank balance to just anyone who asks. A broker might not be inclined to disclose how much you have and how it's held. So we need a PR, we need the probate process sometimes to help collect up the assets. But if we could do all of this, right? If we don't need to worry about real estate title, if we don't have any disputes, no creditors, and no problem collecting assets, then we don't really need the probate system, right? And that's great. We can just do all the things we need to do. But those are the ways in which the probate process might help. Okay, now in Minnesota and other states, some estates can use an informal probate process, which is pretty much a matter of filing some forms. I've given you the link to the Minnesota government website that explains how to do this. So here's your task. Go to that link and decide whether Alice's estate requires probate and whether Alice's estate qualifies for informal probate. Okay, so we're coming to the end of this module. What have we talked about? The different kinds of jobs that probate attorneys have. You talked about that on the discussion board. You talked about what might sound good to you. We've seen some meanings for the word probate. We talked very briefly, maybe didn't really, about probate and non-probate transfers. I think that's in the next half. We talked about the personal representative and the role of the personal representative in speaking for the decedent or the estate, and noted that sometimes that person is called an executor and sometimes they're called the administrator. It's the same thing. Okay, so that's it for this part. Now, after we meet in class, you will do the skills and values assignment. To start thinking about that, go do the short probate quiz on Blackboard and answer some questions. Read the chapter in skills and values and then answer the questions. And then when you're done with that, go ahead, indulge in some silliness. Here, I'll help you.